What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Kami fall in love with Naruto? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage of Konogakure no Sato, the legendary Konoha no Kiroi Senko himself sat in his chair as he rubbed his temples as the man felt a migraine coming along. Today was just not his day as the blonde Kage sat in the council chamber with both Hiruzen Sarutobi on his left, and his advisors on his right. The council chambers he sat in was directly in the same building as the Hokage Tower just behind the tower itself. The structure itself was built into a dome-like pattern with the three circular rows that surrounded the inner chamber. The first was built for the top heads of Konoha's leading governing body, which consisted of himself as the Hokage, his advisors, Hiruzen Sarutobi, but at the far left was his Anbu Sotecho, Ryu as his codename was presented. Then to his right was Shimura Danzo, leader of the special ops unit known as Root. At first Minato didn't agree with the organization, but after seeing the results he couldn't deny the results they brought in, and after some discussions he allowed Danzo to continue with his operations only under strict watch for anything that would jeopardize Konoha in the long run. His sensei didn't agree with his methods, nor did Hiruzen, but Minato felt it would be a beneficial asset to have for Konoha's militant force. Then the second row was mainly for the clan heads of Konoha, which started from right to left, all of whom he had gone to the academy with in his younger days. They all held matters for clan troubles that went out of the clan's jurisdiction, and needed to be addressed to the Konoha's Hokage. Then came the third row, which was mainly for the civilian heads that watched over the more common marketplace, ranging from merchant trading from across borders, commerce with the village, income and taxes from all the villagers. They were also implemented in to be the villagers' voice if a dire complaint needed to be addressed. In which case was one of these days. With all due respect Hokage-sama, I must ask you that you do something about your boy. The incidents that follow him like a bad plague are leaving turmoil for not just the villagers, but now it's spread upon our own crops and produce. Wherever he goes now everything dies or rots in just a day's time. We are losing not only lives, but now income because everything is dying wherever your boy goes," voiced one of the civilian heads clearly in distress. Minato for his part could understand the civilian's attitude. It had been an issue for a long time now about his son's rather unique condition, mind you, not being the one that was sealed into him on his birth, but one that he's had since he was born. This mysterious phenomenon that followed his son wasn't that bad in the beginning of his newborn days. Back then it wasn't much of a thing to worry about. However, as he grew it grew stronger and more deadly as he aged. When he hit 3, deaths were occurring in the most surprising and abnormal ways, but when he hit 5, things were getting out of hand. Murders, suicides, homicides even were being reported on a 2-day basis. Not only that, as the civilian said, produce or anything with vegetation always seemed to die or rot away. Even stranger still was the fact ever since he began Naruto's shinobi training he had an inkling suspicion that this thing following his son was getting stronger at the same time. But he just thought his mind was playing tricks on him. But it wasn't like he could address Naruto about it directly because the boy was only 5 years old, albeit incredibly smart for his age, but still. Even then he'd have to go through Kushina, who had made it adamantly clear anything involved from the slightest bit of interrogation on Naruto would lead to a very heated and at times painful argument. The woman was fiercely protective of Naruto, so much it began to annoy him at times at how much she was willing to safeguard the boy. It was bad enough his relationship with Naruto was tense because ever since he started his shinobi training he felt it was time to push him for what lay ahead. If what his sensei said was true about the prophecy spoken by the toads, he felt it was his duty as the Hokage to get the village's greatest asset ready for the inevitable coming conflict. Yet Kushina was always conflicting with him to never push him too far, which led to more than a few fights. He would have thought having Mito would have made her less protective of Naruto so she could spend more time on Mito, but that only made the problem worse as she had grown increasingly more hostile toward him nowadays. He was actually starting to suspect she was learning of what was going on with her son when he came home beaten and bruised. Kami, he didn't think no one could stop Kushina if she learned the villagers were beating Naruto at intervals. He had let the Anbu that watched Naruto disappear so they could take their frustrations out on him. It wasn't an easy choice, but as Hokage he had to take up the needs of the people over his family. He knew they festered in their hate at the sheer sight of Naruto, and making him a scapegoat for their hate was the only way he could think of that potentially help both sides. By letting them vent their frustration, he thought it would ease up on their hate, and not trigger Kushina to snap and commit a genocide of them for just glaring at Naruto. On the other side, it would help ensuring Naruto's loyalty to Konoha. By wondering why he was hated and beaten, Minato could later on tell him of his burden when he came of age, so he could understand the people's hate and strive for their acceptance, and prove to them he wasn't the demon he contained. Thus solidifying loyalty into his son, and potentially Konoha's greatest tool if his sensei hinted at becoming true would be ready for. Still, with the current situation at hand, Minato felt like he was stuck between a rock and a hard place because he was faced with the villagers' complaints, the deaths and incidents, and Kushina's wrath if she found out he interrogated Naruto in any way about this thing following him. And honestly, Minato wasn't sure what to do. This was out of his hand of expertise, as he didn't have any method that dealt with something like this. Perhaps it was a side effect of sealing the entire Kyuubi no Kitsune into his son instead of pitting itself in half on that night. I hear your concerns, Jiro, but as of now my hands are tied concerning my son. His condition is beyond my area of expertise. Cause to be frank, I am not sure what is wrong with my son, he said, making Jiro scowl. Then Sume spoke up, as she too was affected by Naruto's condition, that being her clan dog kennel always going into a state of pure pandemonium whenever Naruto came walking home with Itachi and her first child Hana. The next day she found the youngest litter of pups had died. Do you think it could be a side effect of his condition, Hokage-sama? Hearing this, Minato shook his head as he gave a sigh. I am not sure, Sume. Whatever is happening with him, it is beyond what I can do. Not even Jiraiya is sure of what's happening, and the man is my sensei, he said, rubbing his temples, but then he heard the ever-stoic Shibi speak his mind. Perhaps you should try an alternative method, Hokage-sama? He asked, making the rest of the council raise an eyebrow, while Minato at this point was open of any possible routes. So looking toward the Aburame head, he spoke. Oh? Did you have one in mind, Shibi? He asked, but the answer he got made him even more skeptical. This is merely a speculation, but perhaps the boy's condition is not from some side effect of his condition, but more like a spiritual possession? Perhaps a foul presence has taken it upon itself to attach itself to young Naruto's body, thus causing all these streaks of terrible incidents around the village. So my proposal for this is to hire a person experienced in this field, and by that I mean hire an Ekashashisuto, exorcist, he said, causing many of the populace in the council chamber's eyes to widen. An Exorcishisuto, they were an occurrence you rarely see, and it was aid they traveled the world in search of those being haunted by the spirits of the dead or children possessed by demonic spirits. It was their sole duty to cast out the demonic presence within the body they possessed, but it was rare to ever see one, as many people these days did not believe in such things, and left it to monks of this day and age. They were trained by monks in the art of the spiritual realm, but they worked solo, and roamed freely instead of being in a temple for their lives. Still, Minato leaned in his chair, and thought about it. While it would be difficult to try, and do this with Kushina, he could possibly sway her, knowing it could help Naruto's condition. That sounds like a good idea, Shibi. I'll send word to the Fire Daimyo to send a message to Fire Temple monks so they can send a message to the nearest exorcist. Now with that settled, let's move on to other matters, shall we? He suggested, causing them to nod agreement, but his mind went to hopefully fixing whatever was wrong with Naruto. 3 days later, sparks flew across the Uchiha training ground, blurs of shadow danced among the grassy fields, stray shuriken and kunai clanged before hitting the ground in dull thuds. Both blurs clashed once again before jumping back a few feet from one another. Multiple cuts and burnt grass littered the training ground with but a few broken trees. The first was a boy 5 years of age, standing around 3 feet 3 with straight black hair with 2 lines coming down the sides of his nose. Coal-black eyes stared as his training partner with a look of exhaustion, but a look of respect to be facing his equal. The boy was dressed in the usual Uchiha attire with a high-collared dark blue shirt, and a pair of beige shorts and sandals. On the back of his shirt was the Uchiha fan symbol. Gripping in both hands was 2 kunai held in a reverse grip as he shifted his stance a bit, ready for the next bout of clashes with his rival. This boy was the young Uchiha Itachi, the rising star of the Uchiha clan, and one of the 2 prodigies at the Shinobi Academy. The second boy was of the same age, and stood a few inches taller than Itachi, with long spiky gold hair that fell past his neckline and covering his ears. His bright blue eyes stared back into the cold ones of his best friend with a look of concentration. Among his cheeks were 6 whisker-like markings decorating his face. The boy, unlike the other, didn't seem all that exhausted besides taking a small breath. He wore a black long-sleeved shirt with the Uzumaki clan symbol etched in dark red on the back. He wore a pair of black pants with black shinobi sandals. Unlike Itachi, the blonde held merely a single kunai in a reverse grip, while his free hand was ready to hurl more shuriken if the need arose. This boy was Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto, son of Uzumaki Kushina and Namikaze Minato, and the second prodigy at the Shinobi Academy. The boy stood there for the longest time before Itachi fell to his knees, exhausted with sweat pouring from his face. Looking up at the blonde, Itachi gave a tired smile before he fell on his butt as he caught his breath. "Alright, I'm done for today, Naruto. I'm reaching my limit here. Right when I think I've figured out your limit and stamina, you surprise me again." The Uchiha heir complained slightly, but it was true. Naruto's stamina was just one of his key traits that made him the envy of many, because the boy never got tired even from training for days on end. The blonde for his part blinked before giving a small smile. Putting away his kunai, he waked up to his best friend, and gave him his hand. Well, a shinobi always has to be his toes. Gotta surprise your foe every step of the way. No? This just made Itachi just shake his head. Before taking the blonde's hand, pulling himself up, he staggered a bit before situating himself. Brushing off the dirt from his body, he responded, "That may be true, but that doesn't mean your enemy should be a stamina freak that can train for days on end. That's a shinobi's worst nightmare," he commented, while Naruto just chuckled at his friend's slight scowl. "Well, don't worry about it. While I feel better in physical exertion, you more than make up for it with your tactical maneuvers. I swear you almost caught me in a few of your wire traps." Seeing his friend was still unconvinced, Naruto's sweat dropped a bit when he saw the dark cloud hanging over his friend's hand. Deciding to cheer him up, he pat his back, making him stumble a bit before walking ahead. "Come on, let's go take a break. I'm sure Makoto-san made you some of your favorite onigiri. I even heard she was gonna be putting seaweed in it for good measure." The blonde chuckled when he saw his normally impassive friend perk up at the word of onigiri and seaweed. It was just too easy, because in that moment Itachi literally grabbed the blonde by his wrist and dragged him along. The stuff was his favorite food besides his taste and sweets for Pocky. Uchiha clan compound. Naruto could only sit there with an amused glow in his eyes as he watched Itachi casually eat a pile of onigiri placed on the dining room table. And by casually, he meant the Uchiha heir was literally eating each one as if life itself was on the line. Letting his gaze sweep across the table, the blonde felt his smile widen a bit when he saw his Ka-chan's best friend Uchiha Makoto holding her second child and Itachi's sibling, little Sasuke. Then he frowned slightly when his gaze landed on Itachi's father, and the current head of the Uchiha clan, Fugaku. The very sight of the man irritated the blonde because of the fact that Naruto always felt him glaring holes into his back when he wasn't looking. He didn't know if the man was like the villagers who hated him for some unknown reason, or just didn't like him hanging around his son, but personally he didn't care all that much. Itachi was his best friend. They were practically raised together due to their mothers being best friends. Looking toward the Uchiha matriarch, he smiled. "Thank you for letting me come over today, Makoto-san. But I think I need to go ahead and head back home and help Ka-chan with Mito-chan," he said, making the woman look up before giving a beautiful smile. "Don't worry about it, Naru-chan. I'm just glad Itachi-chan here has someone to play with here around his age," she said, causing Itachi to grumble before stuffing his face with another onigiri. The blonde just scratched the back of his head, but Fugaku just narrowed his eyes on the blonde. "You're welcome." Hopping off the chair, he pat Itachi back when he saw the familiar widening of his eyes, knowing he was putting too much at one time in his mouth, and was gonna choke. "Careful there, Itachi," he said, getting a small glare, but he was grateful nonetheless. Waving goodbye, Itachi nodded to his friend, and as Naruto started to leave, Fugaku kept his eyes trained on the blonde's back. The man's eyes narrowed before his black pupils slowly shifted into a fully matured Sharingan blazing with hate for the blonde that so casually walked around his home. Thing was, Fugaku didn't really care for Naruto's condition about being the container of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, but what he did have a problem with is the fact the blonde's very presence was causing his clan to be alienated even further, because as it was, Uchiha Madara was said to be able to control the Kyuubi with his Sharingan. Because of this, many of the villagers suspected the Kyuubi attack was linked to his clan, therefore they were being alienated. Not only that, the blonde was becoming friends with Itachi, a genius of his clan, the likes of which they haven't seen since Uchiha Madara himself. He felt the blonde would tamper with Itachi's progress, and felt if he didn't do something Itachi would become deluded from the clan's beliefs. Itachi was becoming the pride and honor of the Uchiha clan, and he was going to be damned to hell before he let the son of his rival destroy this. However, when he activated his Sharingan on the blonde with the intent to at least cast a small genjutsu on him, he made a terrible mistake. The instant he did this, his vision went black as his entire world was flooded in darkness. This caused him to jump in surprise, but then he saw something that made his eyes widen. For it was a shadowing visage in the darkness giving off wisps of darkness, but once it turned to his direction, Fugaku felt the color drain from his face, his blood turned ice cold, and felt his heart stop when he beheld a sight that scared him more than the Kyuubi itself. It was a face wrinkled to the bone and pale as death itself. Blood-red eyes stared as a row of razor-sharp teeth gave a wicked grin. His ruby-red eyes flashed sinisterly in the frozen Fugaku's direction. That was a horrible mistake. Mortal. Then the visage charged at him, opening its maw to consume him. Gah! Fugaku shouted before falling backwards in his chair, hitting the floor with a thud. He backed away from as far as he could from the blonde. His eyes were wide in fright as sweat poured from his forehead as he stared at the blonde. "Tu-san, are you okay?" Itachi asked as Makoto raced over to him, and once the man saw he was back in the real world, he fought for control over his primal feared state. Pushing Makoto's hand away, he stood up, albeit shakily, before leaving the room. This time he kept his distance as far away from the blonde as he possibly could. They missed Naruto's eyes smoldering with streaks of crimson as Naruto left the house, the blonde himself none the wiser. Namikaze household. When Naruto got home, he quickly knew something was going on because of the extra pair of shoes at the doorstep. Not only that, he could hear his father speaking with someone in the living room. Walking inside, he was greeted with the sight of his father speaking with another man with black, gray-streaked hair. He wore robes that befitted some sort of priest, along with a staff leaned against his side. He saw his mother sitting away from the two while giving a dirty eye toward both his father and the mysterious man. Deciding to step in, he spoke. "Anyo. I'm home," he said, getting the attention of the three. Minato smiled at the sight of Naruto. Kushina gained a worried expression. The other man, on the other hand, turned to look into Naruto's direction, and when a pair of gray cold eyes met blue, Naruto for the first time felt a strange surge of anger boil up inside him when he saw the beaded necklaces around the mont's neck, all carrying the insignia of a coat of arms bearing the description of a pair of feathery wings. "Ah, Naruto, please come, I would like you to meet someone." Nodding albeit hesitantly, the blonde came in to sit beside his mother. Nodding with this, Minato introduced him. "Naruto, this man is Masashi Yukifura." "Masashi-san, this is my son Naruto," he said, making the two look towards one another. This time the man gave a nod as Naruto did the same. "He is here to help you with your condition. You're a smart boy, so you already know what I mean, don't you?" he questioned, causing Kushina to narrow her eyes on Minato, but Naruto gave a small nod. He knew of what his father spoke of, but what could this guy do to solve it? "Good, and Masashi, as you've said, you need all the silence you need so you can perform the exercise in Naruto's bedroom. Will that suffice?" he asked, making the man nod once again. His eyes were trained solely on Naruto, however. His gray eyes smoldered for seconds on end before speaking. "Yes, that will be fine, Hokage-san." Satisfied with this, Minato nodded before he stood up, but Naruto grabbed hold of Kushina's leg, causing the woman to look down at her firstborn. Looking up at his Ka-chan, he spoke. "Ka-chan. How is he going to help me?" he questioned, making the redhead sigh, not sure how to answer her son. Because, to be frank, she didn't know what the man could do. But Minato assured her the man was an expert in these time of situation, and he was personally chosen by the fire daimyo himself, so that had to have some merit. Still, she didn't like the idea of a total and complete stranger alone with her baby boy, even if it would potentially help him. Putting her hand over his, she smiled. "Don't worry, Sochi, if anything happens I'll be here, so don't worry. Okay?" The blonde gave a silent nod before he followed Masashi upstairs to his bedroom, followed by Kushina and Minato, which the two stopped outside Naruto's room. Minato led it against the wall as Kushina stood directly at Naruto's door. As Masashi followed Naruto in, he glanced toward the silent Hokage, and nodded. "Don't worry, Namikaze-san. I will see to it that whatever is latching onto your boy is banished, you have my word." Minato glanced toward the man, and nodded. "Just do what you must." With that said, causing Kushina to growl, but hoping this would help, her son kept silent. The exorcist nodded before he went inside, closing and locking the door behind him. Naruto's room. The minute Masashi locked the door and turned around, the man glared at Naruto, causing the young boy to feel nervous a bit. Unknown to them all, the man had felt it, some kind of evil presence overshadowing the very village of Konoha. The very minute he was within a mile or two from Konoha, he felt a dark, foreboding presence casting its shadow over the entire village. This cemented that his expertise was needed extremely, especially from the message he received from the monks of this being a very important assignment. But then once he came to the Namikaze household prior, he felt something very strange about it. It was as something was watching him from the tiniest corner of the house, but he just couldn't find whatever was watching him. However, the very moment this boy stepped into the house, every alarm in the man's head went off like a bomb. The sheer raw evil presence the boy gave off would have sent him if he was in his younger years fleeing in sheer terror. But this was his duty, his job, to exorcise the demons that dwell and stalk the young. But the presence in this boy, it was downright terrifying. The sheer presence he felt was unlike anything he felt before, unlike other demons who kept themselves locked within the bodies of their hostage. The presence in this boy didn't feel like a demon at all, but the sheer raw malevolent aura inside the blonde was just giving him the chills just by looking at him. Still hardening his resolve, he spoke to the boy. "Naruto-san, I am going to have to ask you to back up. I need to make a scripture on the ground." The boy seemed to nod before he stepped back as the exorcist took out a piece of chalk before he started to draw a strange insignia on the ground where the blonde once stood. He drew what looked like 5-pointed star before drawing a circling around all points of the star. Afterwards, he placed a set of 5 candles at each point of the star before lighting them up. Stepping away, the man took off his bead necklaces before wrapping the first one around his right wrist, letting the beads coil around his fingers before letting the white feathery winged medallion dangle. Taking the second and third one, he dipped them both into a strange canteen of what looked like water before he put the second one between him and the circle before he ushered Naruto over. "Come here, boy, put this around your neck, and then we can begin." Taking a slow nod, Naruto took the necklace before he put it around his neck, not seeing. Masashi's eyes widened slightly as the beads started to darken to a pitch black. "Now kneel there, the middle of the circle, and once you do, I want you to close your eyes, and try to imagine as if you're asleep. Open your mind, and let nothing worry you besides calming yourself." Doing what he said, albeit with a bit of confusion, the blonde kneeled in the circle. Placing high hands on his knees, he closed his eyes, and worked going into a state similar to slumber. "Good, now when I count to 3 you will fall into a deep sleep." Now utterly confused, the blonde peeked an eye open. How is this supposed to help? See? Keep that eye closed, boy." He snapped, causing him to stiffen before closing his eyes. Nodding with this, the man took hold of the medallion dangling from his hand before speaking. 1, 2, 3. Weaving his hand, the medallion glowed a bright white before the blonde felt nothing else as his head drooped. But soon enough, the beads around the boy's neck started to turn completely black as the circle beneath him started to let loose wisps of steam. Seeing this, the man frowned before he soaked his medallion before he spoke. "Now, I call on he who dwells within this boy's body, come forth. In the name of Kami, of her divine grace and benevolence, I speak to thee. Come forth out of this boy, and speak to me, vile creature." Dashing drops of water from his canteen, he watched as the water droplets, as soon as they came in contact with him, sizzled. Taking another dash of holy water from his canteen, Masashi threw it on the boy. "In the name of Kami, of her divine grace and benevolence, I command you. Come forth, and speak with me. Swear the oath of repentance, and you shall be saved, vile creature." This time the effect was almost immediate as the water sizzled before the eve came in contact of the boy. The priest stepped away as the circle the boy was kneeled upon erupted in flames, miraculously not harming the boy in the slightest. However, what truly struck him, Masashi, once he saw it made the color drain from his face, the boy's shadow was morphing, changing. Before he knew it, the shadow now resembled a truly monstrous demonic appearance with a giant head with horns sticking out of its head, along with an opened maw of razor-sharp fangs dripping with saliva. He stepped back when tendrils started to seep out of the boy's shadow before it slowly started to spread all around his room. Soon enough the exorcist was left alone in the dark with only the boy to keep him company. Hee. Then he heard it, a bone-chilling childish chuckle reverberated through his ears. He swerved around to look upon the motionless boy only for his eyes to widen when he saw the boy's state. The candle's bright orange flames flickered before they went out completely. But soon enough as the boy raised his head, bright flickering flames of azure were lit on the candles, and the flames on his circles soon turned into a pure shade of azure. "You wanted to see me, did you not? Well, here I am." Naruto spoke as he raised his head completely before his eyes snapped open to reveal not the once innocent bright azure orbs, but now a cold ruthless shade of crimson, the likes of which Masashi had never seen before. Naruto gained an amused smirk when he looked upon Masashi, who was left frozen in place. "What? After all that you're too frightened to speak with me? That's so pitiful," he remarked, causing Masashi to snap out of his stunned state before pulling up the medallion before him. "What is thy name of thou who dwells within this boy? Speak, demon," he commanded before he was shocked when the boy's smirk grew before he waved his hand. "Gah!" He dropped his medallion as it combusted into black flames, letting it melt on the floor. Wide gray eyes looked from this to the entity before him only to an impassive expression on the boy's face. "Oh please, such a simple little trinket has no effect on me, especially in the hands of a mere mortal such as yourself. Now as to your question, how about you sit down?" he said, and like some invisible force Masashi was pushed without any hope of resistance on his butt. Too shocked to utter a word, he was forced to look up at the blonde boy kept looking at him with amusement. "You ask of my name, such a thing cannot be given so easily, but I shall give you a hint, holy man. I am he who dwells in the darkness. I am the entity who brought chaos to mankind long ago and engulfed the world in darkness." Seeing the haunting realization flood his eyes was an amusing sight to see for the blonde. "Why you? No, that can't be. Our texts say you were killed. How are you here?" he asked as Naruto just tilted the mont's chin upward before his smirk vanished. "Blame that on your so-called benevolent kami, but you won't get the chance to, I'm afraid, nor will you see my inevitable return, for you, my dear holy man, are going to die." Before Masashi knew what happened next, the blonde's ruby-red eyes glowed a deep rich red before he saw his worst nightmares come to life. His family being brutally murdered, his wife raped and defiled by bandits long ago, his children murdered. Relive your past, holy man, and feel the weight of those that you failed to protect haunt you for the rest of your days," the blonde said before the necklace around cracked and shattered before he stepped out of the circle. Just in time as the exorcist fell on all fours, clutching his head in pain. Smirking, the blonde looked among himself before closing his eyes. "Now to let things play out, but don't worry child, we will meet soon, that I promise you." The blonde's eyes snapped open to reveal azure as the exorcist saw only red when he saw the blonde before he charged forth. Outside Naruto's room. "Are you sure he's okay? We've not heard a peep since Masashi began whatever it was he was doing," Kushina said, standing closely to the door. Her face etched in worry as Minato gave a sigh. He felt this would help Naruto, so why didn't Kushina see that? Was her worry for the boy overwhelming what needed to be done? "Don't worry, it's only been 10 minutes so everything is fine." "Ah, Ka-chan, help." Naruto's worried shout sounded before the sound of something breaking was heard. "I'll kill you, you bloody monster." Masashi's scream of rage rang loud and clear. And the door to Naruto's room was ripped wide open by Kushina before she saw red when she saw Masashi holding her son, her baby boy, her beloved Naruto, in a choke hold. Minato went wide-eyed at the scene. But before anyone else knew what happened, Kushina already had Masashi by the throat. Glaring coldly into his eyes, she didn't hesitate as she broke his neck to cease his squirming. The body went limp, and Kushina tossed it aside before running up to Naruto. She scooped him into her arms, and left his room, all the while glaring bloody daggers at Minato. "You said Naruto wasn't going to be hurt, you lied to me, and for that I'm moving out. I'm taking Naruto and Mito with me. You can clean up this mess, Minato Namikaze, because as far as I'm concerned you are on your own," she spat before going to Mito's room, leaving behind the frozen in shock Minato, who could only replay the scene before him. It would be 2 hours later that Kushina left with Naruto, Mito and their belongings, leaving Minato to deal with the incident. The realm of deities was a dimension that was cut off from the rest of the universe, was a plane of existence meant for the beings of near omnipotent status. Celestial entities that ruled over a specific aspect from both order and chaos all resided in this plane besides those that chose to stay in their own realm unless called for. It was a land that many of the mortal race had come to see as a land of where those of the deceased would go after death. It came with plenty of names: heaven, utopia, eternal kingdom, nirvana, and simply paradise. But the most accurate name someone could give this realm was a floating kingdom standing atop a sea of clouds, with the only physical entry being the golden white gates that stood at the lowest level of the divine kingdom. The kingdom itself was split into 20 circular sections, each one around the same size of the width of the sun. They were separated from below to top. With it they were all connected by a set of pearl-white stairs coming directly from the gates for those that have passed on and earned their place in the world of eternal. However, floating high above this kingdom was a gold-white palace situated high in the sky, so much so it was nearly invisible to those that looked above their home in heaven. The palace was of Japanese origin, standing about 8 floors high, with its walls being the purest white and roofing to be as gold as the sun itself. This palace that floated high above the 20 sections was, as many of the native denizens called, the Divine Palace. The home of the deity Kami, goddess of life and light. Inside the palace one would expect the great divine structure to be peaceful and in order, but it was the exact opposite, for within the top floor of the palace a heated debate was raging. At the top floor of the palace one would be greeted with a long chamber with long tables spanning the middle of the hall with a row of a total 14 chairs. Finally, at the end of the chamber was a few stairs that led up to a porcelain and gold throne where whom sat Kami in all her divine grace and beauty. And Kami was indeed a beautiful woman with a body that was unmatched besides a select few goddesses. A perfect hourglass figure with milky white skin and pair of D-cups restrained by her clothing. Her supple lips, smoldering golden eyes, and long silky white hair that fell freely down her backside with 2 long bangs framing the sides of her face. The red markings detailing her cheeks and forehead were exotic and made her stand out amongst her other deities. She wore her white kimono with golden linings, but with no footwear to speak of. Now one would think every god would have lusted after her with such beauty, and they would have if not for the fact Kami wouldn't have pulverized them into dust due to the fact the woman much stronger than every deity in this chamber. Plus the fact she wasn't the same kind-hearted and innocent woman she was before the End War. Which was true, as Kami had listened to the other deities bicker amongst themselves had changed very much, because her mentality had done a dramatic shift after she had personally ended the war with her rival Yami, or as he was now known to this day and age, the Betrayer. However, the consequences of ending him came crashing down on her, for without Yami's presence to keep hell in check, and the damage he caused across the universe had left much to be recovered. With the loss of many deities during the war back then, it fell upon her to restore order, first by banishing the remnants of Yami's forces back into hell, which was taxing itself due to the fact Yami's force, even without the major bulk, ranged from trillions upon trillions of demons that threatened to take over many planets under the leadership of some of Yami's generals. Then came restoring stability upon the court of deities. Without Yami to counterbalance herself, she took up the mantle as supreme deity so she could try and keep the balance between heaven, hell stable, which over the years had proven a task she was quickly coming to see as near impossible due to the fact of hell's immense size. Plus she had to dissolve the court of deities altogether due to the fact of Yami's crusade had killed many of them, and thus led to her making the decisions from now on. Of course she was able to revive them, but it was no easy task to bring back a god from the dead, but to ensure stability she needed all the help she could get. However, the damage Yami wrought left scars, one to many, including herself. Hundreds planets he had crushed. Galaxies were not safe from him and his forces. She underestimated the sheer force her rival could muster, and it came to slap her in the face from the destruction he brought. He committed genocidal horrors the likes of which have never been recorded, and all in the name of what he believed the right course of action. At the time she had believed Yami to be wrong, that all mortals deserved a chance to protect themselves with the smallest amount of power from themselves. Now she was beginning to see he was right. Over the course of the years after the war had ended, she watched as the humans grew across the multiple galaxies she placed them, and upon each one they all showed the same characteristics Yami had predicted. With a little power added to them, they were growing stagnant, arrogant and self-righteous, which led to many harboring more than a few sins that caused them to commit atrocities such as murder, rape, slaughter and other evil acts. Start wars that would engulf their world for the sake of the most ridiculous reason or for just more power. This revelation shook Kami the most as it challenged her beliefs, and made her second-guess everything she had done up till now was a mistake. This made her turn cold, and more unforgiving to a lot of mistakes made from both mortal, demons, angels and even other deities alike should it ever come to it. And she had taken it to measures to ensure it never happens again by punishing them. This change had made her authority over the deities absolute after she had stripped Jashin of his status, and sent him to hell. Still, as Kami sat on her throne, her mind lingered on to the world she had left Yami's soul, the very first planet she had first created humans on, and the very planet Yami had destroyed, not one, but the second kingdom of mankind. Placing his soul into the body of her child of prophecy, she had meant to keep an eye on him, but the incident with Jashin, along with the still recovering from the war and in addition of leading the other deities, had made it nearly impossible for her to do without it becoming known to the others as to what she did with Yami. That all believed that she had killed him, crushed his soul, and threw it the 4 celestial winds, and incinerated his boy without any hope of him ever returning. Yet she didn't have the heart to truly kill the only man that was her equal. He was there as long as she was before even the birth of the other deities, and to kill him was simply something she couldn't do. Even now the thought of ending his life pained her greatly. So without being able to kill him, she thought the best way to deal with him was to put his soul in the body of her chosen one, who would either lead mankind to its destruction or to its salvation and heal everything he had done all those years ago. But she hadn't been able to check up on how young Naruto was progressing, and if any of Yami's influence was affecting the young boy due to all the events prior, taking up most of her time, not including she had to be doing it without the other deities becoming suspicious. Sighing, she rested her hand on her forehead as her mind drifted off to how her chosen one was faring, hopefully well with his loving parents by his side. With Naruto, a 6-year-old Uzumaki Naruto could only sigh as he thought about the changes that had gone through his life in just 1 year. Ever since the incident with his father and his mother moving him and his little sister out of the house and moved them into a 3-bedroom apartment. The incident, as far as he knew, had been dealt with, but every time his father came to ask for her forgiveness, she ignored every attempt. The incident, however, did leave Naruto wondering as to what exactly happened to cause Masashi to try and kill him. One moment he was put to sleep, the next he awakens to find Masashi slamming on the floor and trying to choke him to death. But the effects after which made his body feel strange, because after he woke up he felt something had been opened up, and this proved to be true. He realized a lot of changes had come to him during the course of 1 year since then. Physically, he grew a tad taller than most kids his age, now standing around 4'0", but his hair had gone from gold as the sun to being a tad darker, with his hair now passing his neckline and reaching his shoulder blades. His bangs shadowed parts of his eyes, which had also changed from the bright azure they once were to a darker shade of blue. His mother had been overjoyed at the prospect that he may be developing her eyes, but he felt it was much more than that. In addition, he had grown by leap and bounds in his training taken up by his mother when she had the time or himself, which wasn't that hard because he had grown to make his own schedule. His mother had forbade Minato from training Naruto ever again, and if she caught him trying, she would take measures even further to make sure the man could not see him or Mito again if ever. Personally, she didn't blame her either, because his father seemed to get even more crazy ever since the incident, and more desperate to try and train him. And he didn't feel comfortable of having Mito anywhere near the man anymore. His training, however, is what shocked his mother, and made Naruto dash by everyone that knew him because he'd honed his skills to the point it hurt, but with the situation his mother was in, he was determined to help her. By sharpening his skills, he took the academy by storm, passed every test with ease after staying 9 nanograms up all night, every night reading up on the history of Konoha, shinobi tactics and strategies, the first, second and third shinobi war. Then he destroyed the practical exams while utilizing the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu taught to him by his mother in replacement of the Bunshin no Jutsu. He practiced every night and day, to the point he was able to defeat the Chunin instructors in crushing bouts of the regular academy spars. Took his taijutsu to new heights along with his kenjutsu with help from his mother. Genjutsu, he worked to simply dispel every illusion or stop them from even being cast. Ninjutsu he worked to incorporate into his arsenal. Besides the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, he also implemented the Bunshin Daibakuha, Shuriken Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. His Fuinjutsu was something he worked on with his mother, but he took it a step further to work on during the night when his sister and mother were asleep so he could further his reach in the wonderful field of Fuinjutsu. Creating mobile seal tags with his personal seals for explosive tags, shock traps, one that even loosened the earth to a certain degree that would cause the one that touched it to plummet underground, or a paralysis seal tag to immobilize his enemy, giving him the chance to capture them. Because of all these achievements, Naruto had progressed far ahead of those his age. Running a hand through his dark blonde hair, the blonde thumbed the small Konoha headband in his hand with a look of determination. That's right, Naruto had graduated at 6 years of age from the Shinobi Academy, the youngest in all of Konoha's history besides that of Hitaki Kakashi himself, who graduated at 5. But for Naruto, the need to graduate became a primary goal for him ever since he started living with his mother and sister. He knew his mother was struggling with raising Mito, and keeping themselves afloat was harder for her, which was why he took up to graduating this early, and while he felt bad leaving his friend Itachi behind, helping his mother and sister far outweighed everything else. Speaking of his mother, she walked by his side holding little Mito in her arms with a megawatt grin on her face. His mother hadn't changed in the slightest, she was still the beautiful woman he knew, but his little sister, now a year old, was looking like a carbon copy of his mother, with long red hair, a round face with wide exuberant violet eyes brimming with innocence. He smiled at the sight before his eyes narrowed dangerously when he saw the glares his mother and sister were receiving. It became public knowledge that his mother had a falling out with his father, and the villagers all seemed to blame her on some level, and that did sit well with him. Not one bit. Whether his mother ignored their glares or not, he wasn't about to let them treat her and his little sister like they treated him in the past. The very thought made his skin crawl, and an anger surge within him, the likes of which he hadn't felt in a year since meeting Masashi. His glare turned cold as he met eye contact with every single villager that gave his mother and sister a dirty eye. His face formed into a scowl as his dark blue eyes seemed to go darker, causing many of the villagers to flinch and shy away from his gaze. "Anyo, so Naruto-kun, where do you want to go for celebration graduating?" his mother called out, causing the dark blonde to blink before he gave a small smile to his mother. He didn't when it started or why, but his mother seemed to start giving him the suffix to his name, but he wasn't gonna complain. Besides, it was better than being called Naru-chan, as Makoto liked to call him. "Anything is fine, Ka-chan," he said, causing her eyes to glimmer, but just before she could say it, he spoke again, only in a firmer tone, which was surprising coming from a 6-year-old. "But no ramen," he said with a small smirk as Kushina's face fell into a pout as Mito gave a happy laugh at the interaction between her mother and big brother. Looking toward her son, Kushina gave a pout. "BB but ramen," she pleaded, but Naruto remained firm in face of his mother's puppy dog pout. "Ka-chan, ramen is good, I'll admit, but too much of it isn't healthy. Besides, you can cook your famous home-cooked ramen tonight, no?" he suggested, making her perk up before giving a grin. While she knew her son's words were truth, she just loved ramen too much. Besides, she usually worked it all off afterwards during her training exercises to keep herself in shape. Besides, Naruto loved her home-cooked ramen to the point he could eat the whole pot himself he wanted, which she took great pride in. Okay, fine, we'll have it your way. But you're gonna be helping me make Mr." she said, only for Naruto's smile to grow before wrapping his arm around his mother's waist, causing her to blink at the contact before flushing a bit from his firm hold on her. "You didn't even need to ask," he said as the family of 3 walked along the streets of Konoha, all the while flinching away from Naruto's cold gaze meeting them. That night, Uzumaki household. Kushina sighed happily as she looked at the sight before her with a loving smile. She could only watch as Naruto laid his little sister asleep in her crib, cooing her to sleep with the simplest of effort. Because of how close he was to his little sister, the 1-year-old was extremely attached to Naruto in a manner that it was simply adorable. When she wanted Naruto hold her, you would know due the fact she would reach out for him or would calm down immediately if he was. It was cute, but seeing Naruto helping her take care of his little sister brought a pang of hurt to her heat. Not that she didn't hate it or anything, it was just because of the fact her little boy was growing up too fast. Just 6 years old and already a full-fledged genin. Not only that, but while Naruto didn't think she watched him, but she has, And she did see every time someone glared at them he would glare back, knowing full well he would take them out if they so much as said a single hateful word to them. Truthfully, it made her heart sore to know how protective Naruto was for her and Mito, but he was still so young, he should be enjoying his life, not throwing it away. But Naruto had proven to be determined to help her every step of the way now that they were on their own. When he wasn't training or helping her raise Mito, he was always out hunting for animal pelts and meat to sell to the merchant caravan that came in every month just to help her along with finances for themselves. Watching the blonde, Kushina thought about the year that followed after she left Minato. It wasn't easy starting out, and even Makoto offered her a place in the Uchiha compound. But Kushina knew it would be hard, especially since she never liked Fugaku at all. Choosing to live in an apartment had been her choice, and while it was hard, it began to ease up a little with Naruto's help from his other activities in the forests of Konoha. Since she was unable to take up being a kunoichi, she had to let her reserves from her days of being a kunoichi finance them for most of the year. But it was dwindling, and she suspected Naruto knew of this, which was why he studied as hard as he did to become a genin, so he could help her pay for the finances with more money. When all was said and done, though Kushina could admit she wouldn't be able to do all this without Naruto, as selfish as it sounded, Kushina was starting to rely on her son more as the days passed. He was maturing so quickly, and was prone to acts that made him seem oh so much older than he looked that he left her in awe at his bouts of maturity. Still looking at him covering Mito, who was asleep in her crib, she felt tea was the last time she would see her baby boy, and wanted it to last. "Hey Naruto-kun?" she asked, coming up behind the blonde. She encircled her arms around his neck while the dark blonde rose an eyebrow at his mother's affectionate hug. While it was normal for him, this one seemed a bit more closer than the others. "Yes?" he asked as Kushina put her head on top of his, and closed her eyes. "How about you sleep with Ka-chan tonight? Just like we did when you were younger, him?" she asked. And while surprised at what she said, Naruto wasn't all that opposed to the idea, as he had made it his goal to protect Kushina and Mito with all he had. Being close to her was the only way he saw fit to ensure her protection. So giving a smile, he placed his hand on her shoulder, and gave a nod. "Sure, Ka-san," he said, causing Kushina to smile as well. A few minutes later, the two lay in her bedroom. After taking each took a shower, Naruto lay with his arms around Kushina, with the woman doing the same. Her long red hair acting as some form of curtain as his sprawled itself over her, the dark blonde. The blonde was fast asleep, but Kushina was watching him sleep with her violet eyes glimmering as she watched Naruto sleep soundly in her arms. She felt his arms tighten around her body, causing her to smile as she did the same. Even in his sleep, he held protectively onto her. Closing her eyes, Kushina felt a tear escape her eye as kissed Naruto's forehead. She felt this was the last night she would be spending with her baby boy Naruto, for tomorrow he would be starting his first day as a full-fledged shinobi, and the life of an adult seen in the eyes of the village. "I love you, Naruto-kun," she muttered as her eyes fully closed before snuggling closer to the blonde, but unknown to her the blonde smiled deeper in his sleep before muttering, "Love you too, Kushina." Next morning, Kushina groaned in bed before she felt the comfortable warmth she had last night in her arms was gone, so opening her eyes she saw that indeed her favorite blonde was gone. However, before she started to panic, she saw a note on his side. Blinking, he took hold of the note before reading it. "Ka-chan, before you panic, I left a bit early to get my body ready for the test my Jonin-sensei has for me and my team. I checked on Mito before I left, and made some breakfast before I left, so don't worry, I did eat. I don't know how long I'll be out, but I just wanted to let you know where I went when you woke up. Sincerely, Naruto." Smiling beautifully, Kushina held the note close before deciding to check up on Mito. "He is so thoughtful, and knows me so well. It's kind of funny in a way, Titibane," she said, scratching the back of her head with an embarrassed flush coloring her cheeks. With Naruto. Naruto gave a sigh as he walked along the streets of Konoha. It was still early in the morning, and he had another half hour before he had to meet with his teammates and Jonin-sensei. So he decided to cut some time and walk among the village. Not many people were out at this hour besides business owners opening their stores or shinobi getting called for a mission. But the blonde just enjoyed the morning air and cool breeze that came with it, for it was a refreshing thing for him before starting a new day. But as he walked among the village, his mind went to something that had been bothering for the past year, ever since the incident with Masashi. The ill-omened, people nowadays called it, that followed him had grown increasingly more powerful since the incident. While it strangely never affected his mother or sister, it now affected anything that so much as held ill will towards him. How he knew this was simple. The last person that tried to attack him fell into seizure, and just an hour later was reported to have shriveled up and died, as if time itself fast-forwarded the man's age by decades until he died of premature old age. While it didn't affect his mother or sister, he was still trying to figure out where this thing was coming from. Oh well, I won't get anywhere just thinking about it. The blonde blinked though, and suddenly stopped when he heard the faintest ringing of a bell rung through his ears before the faintest whisper floated through the air. His eyes widened when he heard the familiar whisper, as it said things he had no idea about, but felt so familiar to him. Turning in the direction it came from, he rose an eyebrow when he saw a small unassuming shop at the corner of the sidewalk. Huh. I was pretty sure that building was abandoned for a while now, and it seems to be open. Letting his curiosity get the better of him, the blonde walked towards the shop. Upon opening the door, his eyes were greeted with a sight that made his inner scholar scream in joy. Books, piles upon piles of books were stacked upon bookshelves, all of which were old, thick and dusty, detailing their age. His eyes looked upon them all in awe before he looked ahead to see a counter, so hoping to find the owner he walked up, and rung the bell. Hello? He asked. Then he heard steps from behind the door behind the counter before it opened up to reveal a woman. Dressed in a simple purple kimono with an hourglass figure, and a D-cup bust, her milky white skin practically glowed in the light of her shop. But as his eyes looked her over, the blonde felt a small headache come when he saw her long black hair, and her amethyst eyes that once finding him lit up before the woman gave a welcoming smile. Hello young one, is there something I can help you with? She asked. Her voice was alluring, soft as the greatest of silk. Her supple lips smiling at him with a welcoming expression. Taken back by such a greeting, the blonde bowed his head a bit. Yes, I was just wanting to meet the owner of this shop, but seeing as you're here, I'm guessing you own this shop, Ms. He trailed on, causing the woman to put her hand over her mouth, and let out a small giggle before she spoke. I see. Well indeed, this my shop and my name is Aurora. And may I know the name of my first guest in my store? She asked. Scratching the back of his head a bit, the blonde blushed a bit from her gaze for some unknown reason. My name is Uzumaki Naruto, he said, which made her eyes light up a bit before her smile grew in amusement. Maelstrom, huh? Fitting for one with such intense blue eyes as yours. Her comment made his cheeks flush a bit darker, which she seemed to notice, causing her to giggle once more. Now is there anything you would like, Uzumaki-san? She asked, causing the blonde to stop before his eyes wandered off to the shelves full of dusty old books before he looked back at her, and gave a nod. Yes. How much would it be to start renting books here? He asked, making her eyebrows rise at his question. Oh dear, but you're only a child, Uzumaki-san, why would you want to read such old books like these? The blonde just chuckled a bit before he looked at the books behind him with almost a predatory gaze. I've always loved to read ever since I was young. Call it strange, but I just love to read, and know more about the past, he said, causing her eyebrows to raise before her smile grew a bit wider as she stared at the boy. I see. Well, how about this then? You can start renting books for as long as you need to, for about 15 ryo per book, and as a first guest's fee you can take the first 3 books for free. How does that sound? She said, causing the blonde's eyes to widen at such a generous offer. Normally he would have been skeptical, but combined with his inner scholar screaming at him to accept, and the feeling that he could strangely trust this woman, made that feeling be underwhelmed. You got a deal, Aurora-san, he said before looking through a few books before picking up 3, checking them out with the woman. He waved goodbye, and left the store, leaving the woman staring at him as she waved goodbye to the dark blonde. When he was out of sight, the woman's eyes opened before her smile turned absolutely loving as her expression turned into one of immense relief. I finally found you, Yami-sama. Naruto let out a small curse as he did another push-up with beads of sweat dripping from his hair and drenching his body. The ground beneath him heaved with each agonizing lift he did. The blonde was not in the normal training grounds, for he was in the Forest of Death, an area all but left alone by other shinobi due to the extreme caution and dangers that lurk within the forest. However, to the blonde, the place was the only area he could truly train without having to look over his shoulder for a potential spy or someone trying to observe his training. Something he grew aware of over the course of the last 2 years since he began his self-training. And right now the now 8-year-old Uzumaki was doing his set of push-ups, but these were not your ordinary push-ups. Due to his extreme physical fitness, he had to alternate his exercises in ways that increased the difficulty for him by levels. Meaning he had to go from normal push-ups to doing two-finger push-ups to just using his thumbs, and in addition he had a boulder about twice his size on his bare back weighing him down. In addition, he added chakra control exercises into the mix with a thin layer of chakra, keeping small rocks stuck to his arms, keeping them in place so they wouldn't fall off. This exercise worked to increase his control during moments of difficulty, making the blonde exercise both his physical body and his mental prowess in keeping his control steady. It was an exercise he made for himself due to his body maturing faster than expected over the last 2 years, which made average shinobi exercises severely weak to what he could already handle. With that in mind, the blonde created this exercise, and a few others, of course not to his mother's knowledge so she wouldn't worry, but it was proving to give results, so that's all that mattered to him. And 700. With that said, the blonde threw off the boulder from his back and letting the rocks attached to his arms fall off, he rolled onto his back, taking in gasps of air. His hands clenched the dirt beneath him as his body trembled in relief from having the weight of the boulder weighing him down. So 700 is my limit? It's better than 600 at least. The blonde thought to himself before he opened his eyes to look up at the forestry above him. A small smile crossed his face as cool breeze blew past him, cooling his body while making him relax a bit from his training. Laying there for the next few minutes just listening to the wildlife in the forest, and feeling the breeze pass him by, the blonde decided it was time to go home. Surely Kushina would start worrying to where he was, and he knew it was best to get back home before she started looking for him. Jumping up from his position, he landed on his feet, brushing the dirt off his black pants. He looked towards his stuff all left under a tree. Reaching his supplies, he started to put on the rest of his clothes, which began with his sandals and a long-sleeved black shirt. As he did so, the blonde let his mind roam to how the last 2 years have changed so much of his short if eventful life. In just 2 years since he became a genin, the dark blonde's life had taken a dramatic shift. When he became a genin, he was given a jonin sensei and 2 other teammates that were a few years older than him. Naturally, the 2 older genin were shocked that a boy of 6 years old was in their squad, but after hearing of his fearsome reputation around the village made them not question his presence at all. Then as the weeks and months progressed, the Chunin exams came, and in a stunning move Naruto's Jonin sensei Yuhi Yaba accepted all 3 of them, seeing as all of them were skilled enough for the exams. While it was a shock a team with fresh genin would be volunteered into the exams, Yaba had remained adamant his team would succeed. He was partially right. The exams had taken place in Sanagakure, and when Kushina heard about it, she was ecstatic to hear Naruto was potentially gonna be a Chunin. She took Mito with her, and traveled to Suna so she and Mito could watch the exam, and since the exams were all different from each village, the one Naruto and his team had to undergo was much different. The first exam had to do with trying to dissolve a potential hostage situation with only limited resources, and the smallest of time. Make the right choice or the hostage dies. They made it through only because of Naruto's knowledge from reading enough books on shinobi tactics that got them through the first part. The second part was having the team survive in the wildest and most dangerous part of the desert while trying to get to a bunker in the middle of the desert which would save them from the scheduled sandstorm that was to sweep through the desert in a week's time. However, Naruto's 2 teammates did not make it out alive, as one was swallowed by a sandworm while the other was killed by an enemy shinobi. Unlike the rules in Konoha, however, if one still survived, you were eligible to participate in the exam. And that's what he did when the third exam came around. Due to the rules being different in Suna, the last part of the exams took part in the same bunker, which led to an underground arena. You got no rest, for the last part of the exam was for the remaining participants to face against one another in a battle royal, and the last one to persevere and survive would be awarded the rank of Chunin. In the eyes of Sanagakure, to be a Chunin you must be willing to throw all safety out the window, as a shinobi's life is fraught peril, and an endless sense of dangers lurking around every corner and shadow. The world was cruel, and the life of a shinobi was unforgiving. Even if you were to face your greatest foe, you would still need to be alert on the battlefield. It was their third exam which shined as it brought out the strength and weakness in all of the participants, and you had to rely on your instincts to survive in a mass battle of other shinobi and kunoichi. Every trick, skill or ability you had was to be used just to survive. And as Naruto grabbed his Chunin flak jacket, he thought about how it was he that had won that exam. His body was tested to its limits in the second exam, but to ensure further progress in rank so he could help his mother with his mission payments, he was ready for anything. He took the third exam by storm with all he knew. He was attacked by Iwa and Kumo shinobi predictably since they knew of his parentage, but he took them out with a ploy between using the Kage Bunshin and Kage Shuriken no Jutsu. Then he blended into the battle as the other shinobi went at each other's throat like a pack of wild animals, and littered the battlefield with a web of explosive tags. Then he slapped a paralysis seal in collaboration with a Raiden chakra tag which he wrapped around a kunai. Appearing on the outskirts of the battle, he hurled the kunai into one of his explosive tags which transferred his chakra into the tag, causing it to explode. It also burned the two seals he had on the kunai, resulting in a very painful electric pulse that hit everyone on the battlefield with an electric current that struck their nerves, but it also immobilized them. Then the explosive tags lit up, resulting in an explosion. What followed was a shower of debris, smoke, and most disturbingly of all was a shower of blood, flesh and gore coming down on the lone survivor of the exams. The smoke cleared to reveal a sight that scarred every person that had seen the fight besides Kushina, who had jumped in praise for her firstborn. Naruto was drenched in the blood of all those that were hit by the explosion. His dark blonde hair was being drenched in the raining blood as bits and pieces of flesh fell on his body. The way his dark blue eyes seemed to glow, and a cold smirk crossing his features as this happened, and this gained him a reputation. He had achieved the rank of Chunin, the first all of history, at the age of 6 years old, but that scene had also made him known through parts of the continent as the living embodiment of a true demon. A child of mere 6 years of age drenched in the blood of his enemies with glowing blue eyes, and a ruthless smile had left many with the impression that he was just that. A demon in mortal flesh. However, that hadn't mattered to him, and when the exams had ended he was pulled into the tightest hug he had ever received by his mother Kushina. She gave him constant praise to his achievement, and as a reward for becoming a Chunin just a month before his 7th birthday had gifted him with an early birthday present, which was a scroll from her personal Uzumaki clan Fuinjutsu vault she kept locked tight in her scrolls from prying hands of others that did not deserve to even see. Not even Minato had seen the vault of Fuinjutsus she had or learned. Then she took him out for dinner with little Mito in tow, and since then Naruto had taken his duties as a Chunin in stride. The years passed until he reached 8 years of age, and as now with what he gained from mission payments it was helping steadily keeping the family of 3 afloat, and even allow him to save up from time to time for emergencies. Throwing the specialized Chunin jacket on since he was so young, it was made to fit his small stature, but he had the one who made it remove the Konoha swirl, and put the original Uzumaki clan swirl on the back of the jacket. However, in addition to this he strapped on a small kodachi over his back. Since he was so small, he took up to using a kodachi as his primary weapon for kenjutsu until he grew older so he could properly using bigger weapons. It was basic in design with a black sheath and handle, but the guard was a violet shade with rectangular shape. Interwoven in the guard was intricate designs of 4 animals. A dragon, a tiger, a turtle and a bird, all interwoven together in a circular pattern around the inside of the rectangular guard. He found the weapon in a weapons shop in Suna the day after the exams were over, and as another present Kushina, after seeing his interest in the weapon, bought it dirt cheap since the man had no use for what he said was a useless blade. But Naruto had taken to using it as he felt some form of strange link with the blade, which was how he first found the blade. It was slightly bigger than a normal kodachi by just another inch, but it was heavier than a normal kodachi as well, which gave him the opportunity to train his kenjutsu with his weapon in hand so he could get tuned with the kodachi until it felt natural to wield the weapon. Personally, he hadn't thought of a name for it yet, but one was lingering inside his mind, but he had yet to reach it yet. Finally tying his headband around his left bicep, Naruto stood up with his gear intact before he took a deep breath. The last 2 years had also done some much more changes to his body as a whole thanks to his abnormal growth rate, which seemed to grow in speed as the years went by. He now stood a surprising height of 4 feet 8 with a body that just did not look like one for an 8-year-old boy. His baby fat was nearly gone, and he was filling out more with muscle in his arms and chest, but as his body was developing, his body had to grow in accustomed to his muscular physique. His dark blonde hair had surprisingly gotten a tad darker, where now his dark blonde hair seemed less bright, devoid of light. It had also grown in length to now passing his shoulders to the point he had to make a small spiky ponytail for his hair while his bangs were trimmed to just barely covering his eyes. His dark blue eyes had also changed to becoming a more rich and darker shade of blue with streaks of red intertwining in his pupils. His mother had stated his eyes were beautiful with an underlying hint to being very intense, a statement he took to heart, but it was only solidified by his little 3-year-old sister Mito, who had said they were pretty. However, the villagers were downright terrified of his eyes, or just seeing him alone was scary enough. His reputation with Konoha had also gone down a road where as Naruto grew so did his spite for the village to how they always treated him. Since he was young he was always treated like shit by them, but now he was tired of it, and with his mother and sister he had something to protect from their hate, and he proved he would do so time and time again with the last one who insulted his other and sister behind his back. The man was paralyzed, and turned into a vegetable after Naruto broke every bone in his bony, broke his spine, and disrupted his nervous system in a way that every nerve clustered was ruptured. The fact he was still alive was a miracle on itself, but after such a brutal beating that left the street stained in his blood, no one dared to speak ill will of the boy's mother or sister with him even near them. Their arrogance met its match with his ferocity, and deadly actions against them or any that dared to insult Kushina or Mito. This led to Naruto becoming colder to almost everyone besides Kushina and Mito, who he truly cared for with all his being, and Itachi, whom had become a genin at the age of 7. Thinking of Kushina and Mito brought a smile to his face. With Mito being 3 years old now, the little girl had grown fairly well. She was now looking like a carbon copy of Kushina, only she was growing blonde highlights in her hair. She was able to speak roughly well, but still needed help pronouncing some words. However, his relationship with Mito was odd because as she grew up he was there to help Kushina raise her, with it just being them three alone. Before, Mito had always been very attached to him, but her very first word she spoke was to him and Kushina when they were just resting. Dada. It was pretty clear what she meant. She had called him her dad, her father. He was her older brother, but after practically being raised by Kushina and himself she saw him as her father. He was thrown off by it, but Kushina had found it incredibly adorable, and teased him endlessly about how he was Too-san or Dada Naruto. Now the idea of being her father didn't really freak him out, but it was the way Kushina seemed to accept the fact Mito saw him not as her brother, but as her father. Still, he didn't dwell on it much, and just came to accept it. Besides, he was not going to be letting Minato see her with Kushina's firm iron grip on clan laws in place. He couldn't do anything to Eve see her or him. He took up the mantle of being her father a bit well, considering he was only 8 years old himself, but he still looked after her, took her to the park, bathed her at times when Kushina was busy cooking supper, or simply letting her sleep on top of him. Strange as it was, he came to accept it, but it was his relationship with his mother that was truly strange. The day after he became a genin she was much more affectionate towards him, and always helped him with anything he needed. However, as the 2 years went by he noticed Kushina was becoming increasingly more attached to him as of late. For example, she was always kissing his cheek before he left for a mission or embracing him when he came back from one. When he helped her with the dishes after supper she was always bumping her hip with his own like some form of game. Then there was times at night she would want to sleep with him, which he didn't deny her. He didn't mind Kushina's increasing affection for him, in fact he really welcomed it. But as he bonded more with Kushina he felt himself become more loving to the two girls in his life. However, he felt something else change within him when he did all he could for the two. To protect them he was willing to go over and beyond the call of duty to ensure their safety. He didn't have a shred of loyalty to Konoha, but to just protect the two. This change also caused a shift in his demeanor. When he heard someone so much as glare at Kushina or Mito he felt something inside him just tremble in pure rage, needing to be unleashed on the fools. However, if one was foolish enough to insult them or so much as try to lay a hand on them, that feeling made him feel as if he was standing at the edge of an eternal abyss of no return. A feeling of pure unrestrained anger would flood his veins, and the need, the urge, the must to shed the blood of those that dared to try such a thing. And he was starting to embrace this change like a long-lost friend. Sighing so many changes in his life just over the span of 2 years, but as the blonde got ready to leave he briefly looked down at his hand, and his mind backtracked to another issue that had come up in the last 2 years. In the time that followed he tried to think of any possible explanation for the strange ill omen that followed him since birth, And thanks to his delving into the latest books from his resident librarian he now called Aura-chan, he learned a couple of things. He learned through a series of books titled Paranormal Phenomena, Occult and Supernatural Phenomena, Religion and Witchcraft, and one more called Dark Omens. Through reading these 3 books he was able to at least discern that the omen that followed him was not caused by some form of demonic possession, nor was it caused by defect at birth like the Kyuubi being sealed within him. Oh, he knew of the Biju being sealed within him because Kushina had told him on the night he became a chunin, explaining to him of what really happened the night of his birth. However, he had yet to even meet with the Biju. But that was not the cause of the ill omen. He learned through extensive research that the ill omen was a natural affinity that was born when he came into this world. A supernatural phenomena, with an affinity to always cause chaos, discord, death and complete destruction to whatever was left in his wake. With the trigger being the soft silent words that followed prior to an accident that followed wherever he went. Knowing this, Naruto delved into the matter further and discovered something. He could actually harness this affinity into an actually more controlled and focused ability. Of course it came with consequences which proved to be incredibly taxing for him, but the end result always left something devastatingly and downright terrifying to behold. Standing next to a tree, Naruto looked towards the tree before he looked down at his hand, letting out a small sigh. Closing his eyes he focused intently on the affinity that seemed to surround his body, and upon hearing the soft whispers enter his ears he took hold with a mental grip on the affinity. His eyes snapped open to reveal his eyes glowing abnormally before he looked down at his hand to see a dark aura slowly engulf his hand. It was black as night, and completely unlike chakra, for this feels so much more dense and more destructive than any chakra he had ever felt before. Upon seeing this he placed his hand on the tree next time him. Now, perish. With that mental command the energy around his hand acted by being released into the tree, and in seconds Naruto watched as the tree, one that was 10 times taller than him, and having the width of a house, start to crackle. The bark turned from a lively green to a deathly gray as its leaves started to fall before they too started to disappear as if they wilted away into the wind. Birds and squirrels alike all fell as their corpses rotted away by a seemingly overpowering force that killed them and rotted their corpses. Soon enough the tree was entirely dead, with its entire body, and parts of the ground turning gray as well. Lightly he pushed his index finger onto the tree, and watched expectantly as the tree gave way and fell back with relative ease, with it hitting the ground with a mighty crash, disturbing the wildlife. The tree itself fell to pieces once it impacted with the ground. Seeing this Naruto nodded. He expected this since he had done it enough times to know what that one ability was capable of doing. The speed of whatever I touch and rots has sped up significantly since I was 7, but it still puts a stress on my body, he said, noticing the way his hand trembled as a few beads of sweat dribbled down his face from the immense concentration. There was no way he could use this combat-wise due to how it took so long to manipulate it, nor could he let anyone know of this, or he feared of what may happen to Kushina or Mito just so they could get to him. Hell, he hadn't even told Kushina of this ability, and he planned to keep it that way. There was just so much ability he still did not yet know about it, nor what he could do with it besides making things die and rot away. Sighing, the Uzumaki wiped the sweat from his face before he started his trek out of the forest. I guess I should head home before Ka-chan gets antsy. Perhaps I should visit Aurora-san while I'm out? He asked him as he left the forest while jumping over its warning gates. A small smile crossed his face as he thought about Aurora, who came into his life just 2 years ago, and already he found a dear friend in her. After meeting her the first time, he spent time just going by to rent a few books, but also to just spend time with the woman. He didn't know what drew him to her, but she just carried an alluring presence that beckoned him, teased him, entranced him to come to her. Something inside him made him feel like he could trust her, and he did, with her being the only person besides Kushina and maybe Itachi he could truly trust with all his being. He really didn't know what it was about the women that attracted him to her, but whatever the case was, he still spent much time he would have to himself with her if he wasn't with Kushina and Mito. Plus he had to admit she carried a very extensive bulk in ancient books and tomes that he found himself over the 2 years reading extensively. It didn't matter, nor did the thought occur to him of how she attained so many books, because his inner scholar demanded that he read every single book she had, for everyone she had was not one he could find in Konoha's library. And to Aurora's surprise, he took to reading every book she had with gusto. Soon enough he had read over the 2 years gnarly all she had to offer or he felt he had done, and gods. He learned so much just by reading those books which detailed in everything he loved the most. A subject that is all, but ignored and thought of as a myth in the eyes of today's society. The history of the ancient era, the rise and fall of the two kingdoms of man, and most importantly how the end war began and ended. He was so fascinated by it all, and before he knew it he had read every book she had on display in the front of her counter. His mother knew how much he loved to read about these things, and didn't oppose him learning more about it. Strangely, she seemed to welcome him learning more about it. Of course he had yet to tell Kushina about Aurora because he just felt the time wasn't right. Patting the scroll which held his last 3 books from Aurora's shop he left in destination for her bookstore hoping she had more books to read somewhere else in stock. Aurora's bookstore. Rain. Ohio. Aurora-san, you here? The blonde called out as he entered said woman's store, and again he found no one but himself in the store. While it was a bit strange he hadn't paid it much mind, as it left him to speak with the woman alone. A smile crossed his face once his eyes landed on the woman who came out from behind her counter only for her eyes to light up once she saw him. "Ah, Naruto-kun, how to see you again, is there anything I can help you with?" she asked, and Naruto just had to marvel her for a moment. Like his mother Aurora was incredibly beautiful, so much so it left him in awe of her beauty. Her long raven black hair fell with her long tresses coming down her smooth backside with some of her bangs framing her face. Her amethyst eyes glowed in a light that made her stand out from the norm as her milky white skin looked smooth and soft to the touch. "Anyo tilde, Naruto-kun? Are you okay?" Her melodic voice shook him from his dazed state, causing him to see her worried expression, causing him to blush at being caught staring at her. Shaking his head he walked up to her counter as he pulled out a scroll. "I am fine Aurora-san, I just came by to see you, and to drop off a few books while I'm at it." He trailed as he unfurled the scroll and muttered a small kai, letting 3 books land on her counter. However, he blinked when he didn't hear her speak, but his eyes widened when he felt her hands come up to his face, her touch sending a shiver up and down his spine as her thumbs ran over his whisker marks. Gently she held his head so he was looking up at her, and he saw the woman giving him a small playful frown. "Naruto-kun, what have I told you? When we're alone you may call me by your given name for me, so do not be embarrassed about that. Okay?" she said, causing him to blush a bit more from her words, but he held back a small purr which her hands seemed to rub his whisker marks. Gods was Aurora and his mother friends, cause she knew all the places his mother knew to make him feel like jello in her hands. Fine, I get it Aura-chan." He restrained the urge to let out a small purr, for he did not purr. He was not some household pet. But he couldn't deny her touch was extremely pleasant. Aurora let out a small giggle before she leaned over the counter, and to the blonde's surprise planted a small kiss on his nose. Blinking he briefly smelled her scent invade his nostrils. Her alluring scent of roses and honey was apparent to him, but her action was something he had grown a bit used to. Aurora was incredibly affectionate to him, and often at times teased him of how much of a great man he was going to be if he could capture her heart at such a young age. That had made him the shinobi prodigy known worldwide, stutter much to her amusement. "Good, now let's do business, shall we?" she said as Naruto shook his head at the woman's antics. She took the books from the counter, and took to storing them on the shelves. As she did, Naruto looked from her as she hummed a pleasant tune as his eyes looked out to where she came in from. "Anyo tilde, Aura-chan? Since I've read everything in the front of this counter, would you happen to have anything else I can read?" he asked, causing the woman to perk up as she finished putting the books away. Smiling in amusement, she went behind the counter as she eyed her number 1 customer. "Era? Always the eager one, nay, Naruto-kun? I wonder if you will be this eager in other things when you get a bit older," she said with a flirtatious smile. Her eyes looked at him expectantly, and the blonde blinked before his eyes widened at what she was insinuating. Then his face turned so red the tips of his ears went red. He got darker till he could make a cherry pale in comparison. "Oh oi, that's not funny. I'm just 8 years old, damn it," he sputtered as she smiled in amusement. "Ah, but you are a shinobi, no? Because of that you are legally an adult in the eyes of the entire world, yes?" she questioned, causing him to hesitate. Seeing him clam up, Aurora just laughed joyfully at Naruto's scrunched up expression as he tried to think of a way to respond. "Ah, don't worry Naruto-kun. I was only joking, besides you can worry about that stuff when you're a bit older. Now onto your question, I think I may have something for you. But be warned, these are the last of my books you can read, seeing as you've read nearly all that I have. Plus, since you've been such a loyal customer, you can read these books since they are normally forbidden from the eyes of others," she said, causing him to let out a sigh before he raised an eyebrow. "Why's that?" He saw her eyes turn serious as she gazed at him. "Because they are from my personal library, but also because it has been my duty to keep these books out of the eyes of others, but I feel like I can trust you with this book. I want to know what your opinion will be like after you've read it." She hesitated, which was a first for him to see. Her eyes seemed uncertain, but she was willing to lend him a book she normally kept safeguarded from others since it was her duty to do so. "I am honored, Aura-chan," he said, and she went out back before she came back with only one book. His eyes widened, however, when he saw how incredibly thick it was. Seeing how she was strained to carry it only added to how much the book weighed. As gently as she could, she laid it down on the counter, causing Naruto actually see how old and worn it was. The cover and bind was old, worn out and dusty, and the pages were brown from old age. But seeing how thick it was interested him since the book was overly large, and just by being near it he felt a strange pull to it. "This book has been in my family for generations. My brother passed away when I was young, and my parents died a few years back. I inherited the shop, but also the duty to protect this ancient tome. So I'm trusting you to keep this book away from prying eyes, Naruto-kun. Do you understand?" she said with a serious glint in her eyes which made him gulp before giving a nod. However, as his hand went to touch it, her hand snatched his own, but she held it in her own hand as she looked at him with a hopeful expression. "Promise me, Naruto-kun, that you will not under any circumstances open this book until you are alone and away from the eyes of others. Plus, when you do read it, come to me, and give me your thoughts on what you thought about it. I've read it myself, but I would like your opinion on it, okay?" she said, making Naruto narrow his eyes before nodding. "You got it, Aura-chan." Satisfied with this, she let go of his hand, letting him able to seal the book safely into his scroll, but just as he was to fish out some ryo, she held out her hand to stop him. "Please, no need. The only thing I want from you is your thoughts and opinion on this book. That is all that matters to me." Surprised at her words, he gave her a hesitant look, but after a reassuring nod from her made him feel a bit better, but he surprised her by giving her a small hug before he left her store. "Thanks, and I will let you know soon, Aura-chan," he said before going out the door. Watching him go, Aurora leaned her face into her hand, just gazing at the 8-year-old Chunin dash off. Her smile became bigger as she looked down at her hands. "Ah, Naruto-kun looks so much like you, Yami-sama, and yet acts so differently, but I wonder if that will change once he learns the truth about who he really is. What do you think will happen, Yami-sama?" she questioned herself before she giggled to herself. "I wonder if the boy will be prepared for what's to come. What kind of man will he become in the wake of the inevitable? I await to see how much of a great man you will become, Naruto-kun." She trailed on with her eyes watching the boy's back with a small look of admiration. Few minutes later, Uzumaki household. "I'm home." Announcing his presence, Naruto kicked off his sandals as he heard rapid footsteps heading his way, and he stood up just in time for a small red missile to launch into his abdomen. "Daddy!" A small childish voice sounded, causing him to look down to see his 3-year-old daughter, little Uzumaki Mito. Kneeling down, he picked up the little girl, who instantly climbed up over his shoulders, so she was now sitting on his shoulders. Amused at her actions, he let her play with his hair as he spoke to the young girl. "Era? I was only gone for a few hours, Mito-chan. Did you miss me that much?" he asked, causing her to grumble as she just continued to play with his hair. It was her favorite pastime to just sit on his shoulders and play with his hair. Not sure why, but he didn't mind really as long as she is having fun. "Muyu tilde I was bored tilde." She whined pitifully, causing him to chuckle just before he heard footsteps coming his way. "You're always so excitable, Masumi. Can't even wait for your Tusan to fully get into the house." Kushina spoke with a soft smile adorning her beautiful face. Her eyes looked upon the scene with unhidden amusement as Mito just scowled from atop Naruto's shoulders as she tried to act like her father, but only made her look more adorable. Chuckling a bit more, he felt Mito lay her head down into his spiky long hair, and release a sigh. Smiling at this, he looked towards the equally smiling Kushina. "And how are you, Kushina?" he asked. Since he was Mito's surrogate father in her eyes, he and Kushina decided it was best while around the child to act as her parents, so calling her Ka-chan around her would raise a question or two. Looking to him, Kushina's smile brightened, I'm fine, I was just getting supper cooked, until Mito heard you come in. Now how about we go eat before it gets cold, She suggested, making him nod as Mito nodded vigorously as the smell of ramen became apparent to her. She started to drool, but was careful not to drool on her father's head. Yeah, let's go eat, he said as he kept Mito situated. He took Kushina's hand in his own, and the family of three went to the dining room. Gazing at their home, Naruto let a small smile cross his face. Their home. This was the home the three had been living in for the past few years, and with his addition to becoming a chunin, he was able to afford the finances by himself. Not only that, he could supply Mito with all she needed, and whatever she wanted. Perhaps he spoiled her and Kushina like crazy, but he couldn't help himself. They were his family, and he'd do anything to protect them. The apartment was moderate in size with a total of 3 bedrooms with some small renovations, 2 bathrooms, a dining room, kitchen, utility room, living room. Then there was the fenced-in backyard that led to the woods. Kushina had a small garden for herself for her flowers and vegetables. He was able to afford furniture with his second payment, and got a couch, a loveseat and recliner along with a coffee table for the living room. Better beds for him, Kushina and Mito, while also a few decorations for the house with a few various paintings and such. He didn't get himself much besides making himself a small study in his bedroom with a small oak desk, and a bookcase at the side. He got Kushina 2 bookcases for her scrolls, 2 dressers with one having a mirror, and a king-sized bed. For Mito he got her a twin-sized bed which he would upgrade when she got older, 2 dressers, and a toy box filled to the brim with toys. He wasn't about to let Mito become like him, and train to become a shinobi or kunoichi in her case at such a young age. He wanted her to have at least a good childhood, and he was going to make sure she had a damned good one. Sighing, he sat down with Mito put in her high chair as Kushina went into the kitchen to get supper. Seeing her come back with a giant pot of her home-cooked ramen made his stomach rumble, which was heard by the other 2. He smiled as Mito laughed as Kushina giggled at him. Taking a bowl, he filled up some for Mito, for Kushina and for himself before speaking. Itadakimasu. Naruto and Kushina spoke before breaking their chopsticks, and with that the family started eating, with both Naruto and Kushina helping Mito eat her on in small bites as Naruto helped her learn how to use her chopsticks correctly. Just another day in the Uzumaki household. Midnight. Good night, Kushina, Mito-chan, Naruto said, kissing the 2 on the forehead as he drew the older woman's covers over the 2. After supper he and Kushina played with Mito for a bit until the little girl became exhausted, and fell asleep later on in the night in the older woman's arms. Seeing this, Kushina sat on the couch giving a small lullaby to her daughter until Naruto came back from a shower to see her asleep as well. Amused, but still happy to see his 2 precious girls content, he took Kushina and Mito to Kushina's bedroom, and laid her down. The 2 needed their rest. Mito's face scrunched up as Naruto pat her head before she smiled and snuggled into her mother's arms. Kushina though muttered for him to stay. Gently grasping her hand, he kissed her forehead again, relishing how she smiled in content as she held Mito safely in her arms. Stepping away, he held onto Kushina's hand with her feeble attempts to hold onto him failing as he stepped away. Sleep well, girls. He trailed on, letting go of Kushina's hand before placing it on the side of the bed. Stepping back, he turned off the light, missing Kushina's slight opening of her eyes to just gaze at his form in wanting him to return to bed, but soon she felt herself fall to sleep as Naruto gently closed her door. Naru-kun. Giving a sigh, Naruto turned away from Kushina's bedroom, and left toward his own bedroom after making sure every lock was in place for the doors and windows so no intruder could dare to try and break in. Activating the security seals placed inside the house, which spread an invisible chakra dome from inside to covering the entire apartment in a transparent barrier that would alert him of any unusual activity. Satisfied with the security system in place, he left for his bedroom, and upon reaching the room he closed the door as he let out a sigh. His eyes suddenly narrowed as he looked to a small scroll laying on his bed. Walking toward his desk, he grasped the scroll as he sat down. Unfurling the scroll, he turned on his lamp before uttering a small "kai." In a poof of smoke, the book Aurora lent him plopped onto his desk. Rolling the scroll back up, he threw it on his bed before he unstrapped his kodachi and leaned it against the wall. Taking off his chunin vest, he threw it on his bed before he just leaned against his chair. The next few minutes he just stared at the book Aurora lent him, replaying her words, the sense of urgency in her voice and the promise he made to read the single tome when he was completely alone. Back then he gave her word he would, but as he just stared at the book alone in his room he could now feel as to why she urged him to do so. He could feel it, just by gazing at the book he could feel it gave off an extremely strange vibe to him. It wasn't good nor a bad vibe, just a strange one. Taking a chance he placed his hand on the book, and it happened. Thousands upon thousands of images, scenes, death and discord flashed in his mind, fire and chaos engulfed his vision as the sounds of monstrous roars, explosions that shook the lands, and tore the black sky asunder. The screams of pain and agony echoed within his mind before he finally saw a pair of glowing red eyes snap in his direction. Gah! Pulling his hand away, Naruto stared in slight alarm at the book in shock. Clenching his hand he took in a few calming breaths before he looked down at the book. This time he took the need to study the book. While it was much bigger than any book he had ever read before, and he could tell it was extremely old, how old exactly he wasn't sure. But now he knew there was much more to this book. The cover and bind was pitch black in color, which didn't seem to fade over time. There was no title on the book cover. "Alright Naruto, let's try this again. Steel your resolve, and prepare yourself." Saying this to himself he inhaled deeply before glaring at the book. Placing his hand on the cover he opened it up to reveal the book's title, which made him blink. The Legend of Yami, huh? His eyes lit up in interest before he turned the page to start his reading. He knew the word Yami from the other books he read. They all called him names as the Betrayer, the Primordial God of Destruction, the Devourer of all things, the Killer of Gods, the Monster of the Abyss, and so many more. But the one that stuck out the most was that Yami was said to have been the god of hell and darkness. But despite all the bad things he read about the being, he felt his interest revolve around him solely, and wanted to know more. He needed to know more about this entity. Why did he start End War? Why did he cause so much chaos? Naruto needed to know. Unknown to him, as he started reading, the darkness of his bedroom slowly started to shift as the blonde's own shadow started to meld from its humanoid shape into a truly demonic shadow. Within his eyes the crimson streaks in his pupils slowly started to circulate as they melded in with his blue orbs in a slow, almost hypnotized manner. Same time, Hokage Tower. He couldn't take it no longer. For a total of 3 years now he had to deal with the backlash of the incident with his son, and the fallout he had with Kushina. And the backlash had hit Namikaze Minato, Yondaime Hokage, extremely hard. Ever since the incident with Masashi, and how Kushina had murdered him after how he attempted to kill the boy during the exorcism, had left Minato with a whole heap of problems from the other elders, the daimyo, and the fire temple monks themselves. He had to cover it up lest it became public knowledge that an exorcist was killed in his village, by his ex-wife no less. If it got out, the shit storm that would have followed would make what he dealt with the past 3 years seem like a walk in the park. So he got rid of the body, and all evidence that suggested Masashi had even come to Konoha, and sent a letter to the fire temple saying Masashi had left Konoha shortly after, but was reportedly ambushed by a couple of nuke nin that had it out for him. The only thing that was left was his ring finger and his staff, which he sent with a letter of condolences to the monks. But he still had problems with the current 3 years. He didn't know what happened, but somehow, someway his son Naruto had taken it upon himself to become a rather big thorn in his side. The child now lashed out at all the villagers that seemed to glare or insult Kushina or Mito, which only got worse when he public beat anyone that so much as did that into a bloody smear into the ground. Not only that, but with his recent achievement to becoming the second youngest Chunin in all of shinobi history besides Hitaki Kakashi himself. But it was also how he ended the 3rd Chunin exam in Sanagakure that got a lot of political pressure on him. The way Naruto ended it was beyond brutal, and downright terrifying for many, including war veteran shinobi. Some even accused him for training a child into a bloodthirsty demon as a secret weapon for war. Which honestly wasn't all that far from the truth. Still, despite this, Minato was growing wary of Naruto's increase of power at such a young age. It was worrying him due to the fact the ill omen that followed him was growing increasingly more powerful, as it had killed off numerous shinobi and civilian families alike, with one of them being the civilian counselor, Haruno Kazashi, along with his wife Mebuki and their young daughter Sakura, whom all three died in a tragic explosion due to a malfunction in the electrical spark in their home lit up a gas leak which erupted their home and the entire apartment complex on fire. Because of this, the entire council was pressuring him to do something, anything to sort this out. Some ordered for Naruto's execution, but with him being the Kyuubi's container he had to keep him alive, and because of Jiraiya's prophecy. Danzo ordered for the boy to be drafted into his root program, and honestly Minato thought about it because Danzo had ways to whip his soldiers into true shinobi, but that was the problem. Naruto could potentially become Danzo's shinobi, not a shinobi of Konoha whose loyalty was to the village first and foremost. So that idea was scrapped as well, leaving Minato with very little ideas concerning on what to do with the boy. His relationship with Naruto was non-existent as the boy was cold to him, and merely spoke with him concerning missions, and that was it. Kushina on the other hand proved to be unbreakable in her choice of not allowing him to see Naruto or Mito, and issued the clan laws as she reinstated her right as the Uzumaki head in the village, which made any chance of him seeing any of the two children completely impossible. He could have tried to overrule that ruling, but then he would not only royally piss off Kushina and endanger his life in the process, he would also be alienating the other clans and make them become tense around him should he try something with their clans as well. That was why he decided to do something different. As he looked down at the letter from the High Noterra, he smiled as he read their acceptances of his request. Letting his gaze go over to a small B-rank mission scroll, he let loose a small emotionless chuckle. "This will help him, this will fix everything, I know it," he said, desperation clear in his words. His eyes glinted with a small sight of madness as the Hokage furled up the letter as he got ready for tomorrow's mission briefing. This had to work, it just had to. Leaving the office, locking the door behind him, he never saw a small shadow melt out from behind his desk before it came out from the wall to reveal a humanoid. The shadow slowly sunk into the body, revealed the expressionless face of Aurora in all her glory. Silently she looked down at the contents of the Hokage's desk, and picked up the acceptance letter. Reading it for herself, a cold smirk crossed her face as her eyes lit up with excitement. "Oh, you foolish, foolish mortal, if only you knew what this will bring about. I should applaud you though, you've officially brought about the destruction of your own home, and with this the age of anarchy will commence." Letting out a small chuckle, she put the letter back where it was before she looked over at the scroll. Bringing her hand down, she lightly brought her finger down and tapped the scroll, causing a small dark flash to appear in the scroll before it returned to normal. Satisfied with her task complete, Aurora looked out at the full moon, and a peaceful expression crossed her face. "Soon, Yami-sama, your return will come, and I await to see what changes you and Naruto will bring to this pitiful world, and to the rest of the universe. Until then, I await your inevitable return, my lord." Closing her eyes, the woman melded into the floor into a formless shadow before vanishing without a trace of her being there. One thing was for certain in her mind: the winds of change were coming, and it was bringing a hurricane of which will cause a cataclysmic shift in the balance, and she would be ready for it.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.